Welcome to The Art of Discernment, a podcast where professors from across the Masters University discuss current events and higher education from a biblical worldview.
Hello and welcome back to the Art of Discernment broadcast. This is Dr. Bob Dixon, and joining me today is Dr. Tai-Danae Bradley. Dr. Bradley, nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Dr. Bradley holds a PhD from the City University of New York Graduate Center. She is currently a research mathematician for a large tech company, and we are currently blessed to have her here as a visiting professor. Since 2015, she has written blog posts for her website, mathema.com, as a way to clarify complex mathematical ideas for herself and others, which I know I need all the time. And this fall, she has helped us launch a STEM research institute at the university. Your PhD work was related to artificial intelligence with a focus on mathematics that arises in language and how that math can be used to help computers understand language better. Now, that's a lot. There's a lot going on there, so that's what we're going to unpack today. First, where did the idea for this PhD research come from?
Yeah, so thank you for asking and for having me here today. Interesting question. When I was in graduate school, I had a thesis advisor, and around the time that I needed a dissertation project, my thesis advisor, who is a mathematician at CUNY, founded a research startup company in essentially language modeling, natural language modeling, using ideas from mathematics and even from physics. So around this time that he founded this startup, it was the same time I needed a dissertation project for my PhD. And so he kind of suggested, hey, why don't we work together on this? You know, we're doing some cool AI related things, and you're learning math and you need to write a thesis, a dissertation. Why don't we make it on this topic? And so I thought, hey, that sounds great. Let's do it.
That's great. I mean, when I was in school, there's a big separation between math and language. You know, there were those of us on one side of the room, and we were the language arts students, and then there was the math students that I always kind of looked at with awe because they could understand these things and solve these problems, and it was much harder for me. Now, you say mathematics arises in language. Can we dig into that a bit? Like, what math are you referring to when you?
Okay, so there are a number of ways I could answer this question.
I bet, yeah.
I'm gonna choose one way that I really like a lot.
Okay.
Now, it may not seem mathematical at the beginning, but it'll be fun.
All right.
So let's go for it. Now, there's a famous linguist who has this well-known quote from the 1950s. His name is John Firth, and he's well known for saying, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps."
Huh, okay.
And I like that. How do you know what a chair is? Well, you kind of look at the English language and you see the context that the word chair is in. Like, okay, people sit in chairs. There's a chair in the dining room, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so chair somehow, its meaning is captured by its context or the network of ways that word fits into the surrounding language. So that's kind of a philosophical perspective. Mm-hmm. But what's amazing is that concept, where the meaning of something is captured in its relationship to other things, that's actually a very mathematical concept. And it turns out that in the mathematical universe, that same thing happens. So it turns out there's actually a theorem in mathematics that says, if you want to know all there is to know about a mathematical object, I'm being very vague here, because what does a math object mean? I don't know. I mean, I do know, but let's not.
You know I don't, but I trust you.
But there's a theorem that says all of the information about that thing is contained in the network of ways it fits into its environment. So what's funny is that you look in linguistics and you see this there, and you look in the mathematical landscape and you see that there. And it turns out that in mathematics, there are formal tools to make that concept rigorous. And then you can actually use those tools to maybe model things in language. So that's one way, of many ways that math arises in language.
So in other words, I'm going to sum this up, but I'm not. But I think I understand. So you talk about a chair. We're both sitting in chairs right now.
Yeah.
If you were to study 10,000 pages of text,
yes,
there's a number of times that the word chair comes up. And how many times does chair come up alongside the verb sit or that?
Exactly.
And connected to numbers of people versus chairs. Like there's you can quantify that in language. And my understanding of math and computers is if you can quantify something, now you can teach it to a computer. Is that
Yep.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Yep.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. So So how can math then, I guess this is the next question, it makes sense. How can math be used to help computers understand human language?
Yeah. So I think you hinted at it there when you used the word quantify. So the word chair is a word. I mean, it's comprised using, letters from our alphabet. But maybe computers don't quite know what letters are, but computers are very good at understanding numbers. So then the question is, how can we actually represent words or text in a way that computers can understand, like in numbers in some way? So one thing that you can do that's very popular is to take a word and represent it not by a number, but actually a list of numbers. So if you think of an Excel spreadsheet, right, it's got columns and rows, and you can imagine having just a column's worth of numbers, like 3, 7, 0.2, blah, blah. So it turns out that a big task in natural language processing is to represent a word by a list of numbers, like a column in an Excel spreadsheet, such that those numbers capture something of the meaning of that word.
Okay.
So where does the math come in? Well, they're numbers, so there's math. But then the question is, how do you actually find those numbers? How do you find that representation in a way that's useful? There's a lot of mathematics that goes into that.
Oh, boy. Okay. After you answer these questions, I have to think for a second to make sure I get my mind around it, so I can keep up with this, because this is really interesting to me. So what are some real world examples of how math is being used to help computers understand human language better? Like examples or applications, maybe that's a better, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think that there are some applications that probably lots of folks are familiar with. For example, if I send a text message, maybe my phone might autocomplete, the rest of my text, like, hello, how are you? And then my phone might prompt the word doing. How are you doing?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right. So there are things like autocomplete or Google Translate. How do you say hello in Spanish? Hola, right? I can type this in on my computer. Right. So I think these are things that folks are familiar with. So you're taking language and you're inputting it into the computer, and it's outputting language in a way that you would expect, like translation or autocorrect or something. But there are more, so these things are called language models, by the way.
Okay.
So a language model is essentially, a recipe or an algorithm that predicts words based on some input words, or based on, if I say, I went to the grocery store to buy a loaf of
bread.
Okay, so you're an excellent language model because you predicted this correctly. So with very high probability, that sentence would end with the word bread. With very low probability, would it be, I went to the grocery store to buy a loaf of airplane.
Very low probability.
Okay, so you want to learn this probability distribution on language, and just learning that thing is called a language model.
Okay.
It sort of says, okay, with high likelihood, the translation of this sentence in English would be yada yada in French, or the end of this word would be bread or something. Okay, so it turns out that nowadays there are much more sophisticated applications that can happen. So we just talked about translation or completing sentences.
Right.
But now there are applications like you can ask a language model to read a news article and summarize it for you in 2 sentences. Or you can ask it to write a poem in the style of your favorite poet, and it can do that.
Okay.
You can ask it to, read a movie review on Rotten Tomatoes and say what the sentiment is. Is that a positive review or a negative review? You could ask it to write a blog post that sounds very much like a human wrote it, and you can't distinguish between a human's writing and a computer. So now they're very sophisticated.
And can you? I'm gonna sound archaic. Can you program this into an AI for like a robot sales call to you?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, these chat things,
Where it's definitely a human voice on the other end. I mean, it's very natural sounds, and then it seems to, like, there's a pause, and then it answers your question. Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'm talking to a human or not at that point. And is that part of that probability, that sophistication? So you said something interesting. You said, you could have it write poetry, and that gets very philosophical because now, what makes something artistic, and what makes and how's your experience been with that sort of thing? It's a broad question, but just
it is. Well, so there are kind of two. So the camp is kind of divided into two regions. So some folks say, oh, this is real intelligence. The computer, it's like a human. It has feelings and it can write this beautiful poem. And then other folks are kind of on the opposite end. They're like, no, it's just recognizing patterns. It just looks at all of the poems that it's read before, and it just kind of infers, oh, usually people like rhyme these stanzas and da da da. So folks are kind of divided. Is this actually what's really going on here? Is it just a dumb computer, but that can look at patterns and reproduce them really well, or is there something deeper going on?
But when I teach writing courses, and if I teach a class on writing a short story or writing a poem, we're looking at models, like we're looking at patterns. That's one of the ways that I teach human beings to write. I say, well, what are the models? Let's look at how it's been done before, and let's study what makes it exceptional, and let's try to do likewise. So is that really so different from what you just described?
It certainly does not sound different on the surface. I mean, this is what you're doing with the computer. You're training it. You're showing it examples, and you're saying, hey, learn to do this thing. Very much like you would teach others. Yeah. Okay.
So what's the difference between a language model and, I guess, a large language model? Because I know there's I've heard that.
So a language model is just this kind of basic concept, this umbrella term for using statistics in language to sort of predict which words will come next, whether that's in a translation or an autocomplete or something like that. A large language model is kind of a newer term that's been out for the past few years, and it refers to a very specific recipe or algorithm. How are you going to use the statistics in language to make these predictions? There are many ways that you can do that, and people have technical terms for those.
Okay.
One of those terms is called a neural network. So a neural network is a piece of sophisticated machine learning that's used nowadays. And the word large just means that when you train this language model, like you're training your students by saying, look at all of these examples, the word large refers to the amount of data that you're using to train. Like how many poems did you let your students read? I don't know, maybe like 5 or something.
Right.
But maybe for this large language model, it's something like 5 million.
So computers don't suffer from cognitive overload, do they?
I mean, right. But then there are other questions like, hey, is this really efficient? It takes a lot of compute power to train these things. It takes a lot of time too. So the word large refers to kind of the number of parameters that are involved. Parameters are like little mathematical knobs you can tweak to kind of make sure the things work the way that you want them to. So the word large is just referring to this kind of big data, large parameter type thing behind the scenes.
And is that limited by like you said, the computing power, and therefore also unlocked by greater quantum
That's
computing?
That's right. So, I mean, there are papers that are published nowadays that are like, look, if you have a bigger computer and more compute power, then you get better results. So this is a thing that's certainly area of research, Okay,
so you wrote on your blog that the text used to train a large language model is totally unstructured.
Yeah.
So meaning that there are no grammatical or semantic rules or information given in the model. Explain that a little bit.
Right. So what that means is that when you are showing data to your language model, this is analogous to showing your students poems. You don't have to tell the computer that a chair is a noun and that sit is a verb and that, lovingly is an adjective or something. And maybe you don't have to do that with your students either, but maybe at some point they learned when they were in grade school or something. Yeah. So all that means is that you don't have to tell the computer grammar or syntax. But what's interesting is that it kind of infers this, or it learns this. And how do you know that? Because it actually produces coherent chunks of text that are grammatically correct. So when I said unstructured, I just meant you just kind of let it read English, like correct English, and you don't have to tag. You don't have to do parts of speech tagging. You don't have to say, hey, this is a noun, and make sure that, your verbs match your nouns, whether they're singular or plural, like, hey, computer, there's all of these words, rules. You don't have to tell it that. You just say, here's what good English looks like. Produce some of your own.
Okay, and these algorithms, like all algorithms, they're learning all the time.
Yes.
And is that dependent somewhat on the individual too? Can something be tailored to your, I guess so, I think you kind of answered this, to your own writing style? I mean,
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So the kind of output that you get in these language models definitely depends on the kind of input. So if you were to sort of only show your language model, poetry written for 5-year-olds, then that's all it knows. So if you ask it to write a poem, probably it's going to output something in the same style. So yeah, kind of based on your input or your data, that'll affect the training and the output as well.
Because language is so complicated, complex, always changing. I mean, it would be easy to teach a computer Latin because it's well, easy. I say easy because, theoretically everything, I don't know how to do it, but it would be easy. But, Latin is static now. It's not changing. But for English, for example, if you were to try to say, well, no, this computer, this is a verb. Tomorrow might be used as a noun or vice versa. And then it's, the computer has to be able to learn and for itself somehow.
Yes.
Right? And how that's a mystery to me in some way, but I think you're helping me see better what that means. And for sure, I think that this is an answer to anybody who's listening to this who either has kids or has thought this themselves. Oh, why do I need to learn math? I don't need math. I have a calculator. Well, actually, this is more complicated than that, and it has a lot more application than just, balance my checkbook.
Definitely.
Which is not a bad thing to do, but has much more application.
Absolutely.
So when I'm typing a text and it starts to auto and it's right way too much of the time, which kind of freaks me out. This is the reason. This is why, listener, that your phone seems to understand you a little better every day.
That's right. There's a lot of math behind it.
We've talked a lot of philosophy and technology, and it's interesting how those two overlap these days. Now, as a Christian, as a mathematician, what are your thoughts on your research from a biblical perspective? I know that's a big question. It's a lot, but I know you think about these things.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think towards answering this question, I might take a step back a little bit and kind of broaden the perspective. So I'm a mathematician, and personally, I'm actually interested I'm interested in less in applications of things and more of why things work the way they do. Mm-hmm. Now, one way that you can get a better understanding of why things work the way they do is by taking a 30,000-foot viewpoint. Okay, so you may ask, or I may ask, hey, there's this mathematical structure in language. That's really interesting. I studied it for several years. But you may want to abstract that a little bit and say, does this kind of structure appear anywhere else? Mm-hmm. Not just in the scientific landscape, but what about in creation? What about in the natural world? Where else do we see little constituents like words coming together to create a cohesive whole whose sort of properties are driven by the statistics of how those little constituents fit together? I'm just abstracting this phenomenon in language, and I'm asking, do I see that elsewhere in the world? Turns out the answer is yes, actually. This kind of structure also appears in physics, the physics of the very small, like the quantum world. Yeah. And I like that because what that means is that maybe I can use mathematical tools that physicists have used and apply those tools in understanding something about language. And maybe by transporting tools across realms, I get to see things that maybe other folks haven't seen because they didn't think about those tools. Or maybe I have different perspectives. So why do I like doing that? Because all of this, I just think, speaks something to, number one, God's genius and wisdom in creation. I look at the created world, I see mathematics all the time there, and I think, wow, our God is a great God. Mm-hmm. But also his common grace in even allowing us access to these things. I mean, I look at the world of artificial intelligence and all of the amazing technology that's been produced nowadays. I mean, it's incredible work. And I think that all of that is God's common grace. He's allowing us this knowledge. He's allowing us to have this understanding. And why? What's the purpose for that? It's really to give the glory back to him. Mm-hmm. Now, not everyone in the field does that, but yet that's the point. I mean, it's amazing that he has equipped our brains to be able to think and understand the world and then be creative and then create things that can, hopefully make society a better place. Right. But then as a mathematician, as I look under the hood of those things and I ask, why does that work? I get to see another level, right? And it's kind of an invisible level that not everyone sees.
Right.
And that still endears the Lord to me. Like, wow, he's so amazing that he let our brains think about mathematics in this way that then has an application. And it's amazing that, wow, that mathematics also appears in the natural world. What a great savior that we have. I mean, so this is one perspective.
Yes. I mean, we look at creation and we glorify the Lord. Well, creation isn't only the sea and the sky and mountains. It's, you say, looking under the hood. It's just taking closer look and seeing it, whether it's a chemist looking at the chemistry, whether it's a physicist looking at the the physics of it, or a mathematician understanding the math of it all, how it works together. That's also God's creation.
Exactly.
And that's fantastic. Okay, before we finish up, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the STEM Research Institute that you've helped establish. So it's Mathema.Institute. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So Mathema, the Mathema Institute, was really born very recently from my website, Mathema, which you alluded to at the very beginning. Now, the Institute is essentially a brand new research hub on campus, encompassing not just mathematics, but all of STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's essentially a little initiative that we started so that students here on campus can also get their feet wet in the world of research. So, learning technical sciencey topics in the classroom has a bit of a different flavor than doing original research,
right,
whether that's, graduate level work or even, at the professional level. So we want to provide some of those opportunities to students on campus and create sort of a research vibe here. And this is really born from some of the things we talked about already, which is using the talents and creativity and knowledge that God has given us of his creation for his glory. Essentially, our slogan is esteeming the voice of Christ in STEM. So
Nice.
we want to do this not so that we can pat ourselves on the back and say, look how smart we are, but so that we can learn these things and say, wow, look how great our God is. So we want to kind of learn this knowledge and then share it back with the world in a way that's accessible, because science can be very technical at times. So we want to share those things with the world in a way that's easy to understand so that they may in turn look to the one who is the true source of it all. So some initiatives we have, for example, this spring, we're starting a brand new expositional journal where TMU faculty will write about their original research in a way that's accessible and easy to understand. So, we'll have a copy in the library so folks can check it out there, and we'll also have a digital copy online. We'll do other things like we've been talking about having a public lecture series, so we can give talks about these things and invite students and faculty, but also folks from the public who are interested. So the Mathema Institute is really taking these sort of research directions and then bringing them to campus and providing an avenue for students.
I love it. So it's Mathema. Now, it's not to find it online, it's different than it sounds. It's math3ma.institute. Mathema.institute is the institute, and mathema.com is your blog.
That's right. That's
okay.
right.
So it's math3ma.com or .institute, either one.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Wow, this is some heady stuff. Like I really have enjoyed this, and I hope listeners, I hope you've enjoyed it too. Dr. Bradley, thank you so much for shedding some light on a fascinating area of study, and we're blessed to have you here on campus. I'm sure our students are taking full advantage of your expertise in this area. It is fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Art of Discernment. For more information on the Masters University, visit masters.edu. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We'll see you next time.